I never believed in ghosts. But that night, the radio showed me that the worst kind of haunting isn't from the beyond. It's from someone who's still breathing. Someone who was there. This happened to me this past February, and ever since, every bit of static on the radio sends a chill down my spine. That voice in the void, it never stopped calling. I'm a telecommunications engineer with a specialization that takes me to the most remote corners of the United States. My job is to make sure communication gets through where cell service dies. This past February, I went out alone to a repeater station in the heart of the Louisiana Bayou, a place where the silence is only broken by the wind and the wildlife. It's over 125 miles of dirt and gravel roads to the nearest point of civilization. My mission was routine, almost monotonous: replace a faulty transmitter that had been failing for weeks. I arrived on Tuesday around 4 in the afternoon. The sky was a deep blue, the region's signature humid heat clinging to the skin. The station itself was a functional metal container, surrounded by solar panels and imposing antennas, all set amidst lush, dense vegetation. For someone like me, who values self-sufficiency and isolation, the place was a refuge. I set up my hammock on the rustic porch of the small support cabin, the smell of damp earth and swamp mixing in the air. The HF radio, a Yaesu FT891, was connected to the directional antenna, carefully aligned with the control post hundreds of miles away. The auxiliary batteries guaranteed power even without sun. I prepared my simple dinner, some instant noodles, and while I ate, I left the radio on a general monitoring frequency, just to stay informed about weather conditions or any potential emergency calls. The nocturnal sounds of the bayou, the croaking of frogs, the buzzing of insects, the distant bellow of some animal, were the perfect soundtrack for my well-deserved rest. Everything seemed to be in perfect order, a scene of peace and controlled isolation. The tranquility of Wednesday night, however, was shattered. Around 10 p.m., while I was checking the voltage of the solar panels under the dim light of my headlamp, a sound caught my attention. Coming from the Yaesu radio, a weak and intermittent voice, almost swallowed by a wave of loud static. My first reaction was dismissal. I thought it was just atmospheric interference, maybe from a distant storm, something common in these latitudes. Still, with the routine of someone who deals with weak signals, I adjusted the frequency, trying to isolate the sound. The voice persisted, and a shiver ran down my spine when I realized it seemed to be a call for help. The words, however, were difficult to decipher, in a language I couldn't immediately identify. It was a desperate murmur, a lament that seemed to come from very far away. I kept adjusting the dial, curiosity mixed with a growing apprehension. At 11:15 p.m., the miracle of technology, or the harbinger of horror, happened. The voice became clearer, undeniably female, and the words, now clean amidst the static, were a desperate plea. "Help! Help me! They're here! I can't get out!" In that instant, the peace of isolation turned into unease. Why would someone be calling for help on an open frequency, without identification, from such a remote place? I picked up the radio's microphone, my hand trembling slightly. "Repeater Station X1, this is Engineer Alex. Who is calling? Please state your location." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the radio's white noise. Then a different sound came over the line. A heavy dragging, like something being scraped across the dirt ground, followed by a metallic click. The voice returned, now a hoarse whisper, filled with pure terror. "They heard. They're going to find me. Please." A new wave of interference took over the line, more intense than before. This time, however, there was something different about it. An almost rhythmic quality, as if it were deliberate, intentionally blocking any communication. It was as if someone, on the other end of the line, was trying to stop me from hearing, from helping. The feeling that something was fundamentally wrong settled in, cold and penetrating. The metallic click, the dragging on the ground, those words, "They heard, they're going to find me," echoed in my head as a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I turned off the microphone, my heart hammering in my chest like an out-of-control drum. I tried to rationalize. A fake distress call, maybe a radio test, a prank from someone with access to similar equipment. But the voice, that voice wasn't joking. It was pure desperation. I stood motionless on the porch, my headlamp sweeping the dense darkness surrounding the station. The normal sounds of the bayou seemed amplified. Every croak, every snap of a twig sounded like an imminent threat. I looked up at the antennas, tall metal skeletons against the starless sky, and suddenly felt as if they were eyes watching me. The radio started making sounds again, but now it wasn't the desperate voice. It was a different interference, a sharp, constant noise, like a high-frequency whistle that seemed to be coming from outside. My stomach turned. This wasn't normal. I grabbed the survival knife I always carry, the cold blade against my sweating palm. It wasn't for combat, but it was something. I looked at the metal door of the container where the main transmitter was. It was locked, just as I'd left it. Suddenly, a low, dragging sound. It was coming from nearby, very nearby. Not from the swamp, but from the station itself. A noise of metal scraping against metal coming from under the porch. Frozen, I tried to focus my hearing. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Someone was messing with something at the base of the container. My eyes darted to the batteries, to the cables that ran out to the antennas. Something was being done. A hand appeared at the edge of the porch, caked in dirt, holding a small pair of wire cutters. The hand paused for a moment, as if sensing the air, and then began to work on the wires of one of the batteries. There was no way to escape. The night was absolute, and I was miles from any help. Fear paralyzed my limbs, but a small spark of survival instinct ignited. The radio, now emitting a sharp, unbearable hiss, was right beside me. The hand on the battery continued its methodical work. I lifted the radio, aimed it in the direction of the sound, and with a shout that came out more like a hoarse gasp, I pressed the transmit button, saying anything that came to mind, repeating who is calling and the location. The hand stopped. The wire cutters fell. For an eternal second, no sound. Then, a violent shove on the container door threw me backward. The door gave way, and in the opening, against the little light my phone's flashlight cast, I saw a figure. Not a face, just the silhouette of someone tall, wearing something dark and a hood. I couldn't see anything else. The hiss from the radio ceased abruptly. A total and absolute silence fell, more terrifying than any sound. The shock and survival instinct propelled me. I rolled away from the broken door as the hooded figure stepped inside. I ran towards my truck, stumbling in the darkness, the footsteps behind me confirming the pursuit. My hands were sweating so much the key barely fit in the ignition. The engine finally caught. As I reversed, I saw the silhouette standing there, watching, but not chasing. I drove like a madman through the trails, fear guiding me. I reached a small town at dawn and went straight to the sheriff's office. I told them everything, the call, the interference, the cut wires, the figure. The sheriff listened, but the response was discouraging. Without concrete evidence, without a serious crime, there's not much we can do. This kind of thing is common in these parts. A chill went down my spine. Common was the most frightening word. A week later, on a ham radio forum, I discovered something worse. Other isolated reports in remote locations with distress calls on the radio, rhythmic interference, and similar equipment failures, always on dates close to my experience. No explanations, no criminals caught, just a sinister pattern and the persistent fear in the void. Since that night, my life has changed. The doors to my house are always locked, even when I'm inside. I check the wires and batteries of my equipment with obsession. I avoid remote areas. The silence causes me panic, and the static on the radio makes me jump. Every unexpected noise, every shadow in the corner of my eye takes me back to that figure. Once, during a work trip, in a hotel in another city, I received an email from an anonymous sender. Just one sentence. Still hearing the call. That email was deleted in seconds, but the feeling of being watched, that it wasn't over, has never left me. I know they know where to find me, and there's nothing I can do.